First, let's take a look at our popular vote board. 2% of the vote is in. There is the result at this moment. Nixon first, Humphrey second, Wallace third, 43% to 35% to 21. Chet?
NBC News now projects the winner in Mississippi will be Wallace, coming out with 60% of the vote. NBC News projections are sure that Wallace will win the presidential race in Mississippi. However, there's still some doubt about the final percentages of the vote for Wallace. Hubert Humphrey and also Hubert Humphrey and Richard Nixon. There may be some changes in these percentages as the night goes on, but we are sure that Wallace will carry the state. Here are some other state-by-state returns. Vermont. Vermont, 1% of the vote in, still fragmentary returns, Nixon leading. New Hampshire, about the same in New Hampshire, only fragmentary returns, Nixon leading. Ohio, 2% of the vote is in Ohio. Those figures are gradually climbing. Nixon with 49%, Humphrey with 40%, Wallace with 11%. Virginia, less than 1% of the vote in. These are only fragmentary returns, but there Humphrey is in the lead. And in West Virginia, less than 1% of the vote in, still fragmentary returns, Nixon in the lead. Now, on the basis of returns thus far, it looks to NBC News projections as if it's going to be a close presidential race. Thus far, there are no decisive signs for either Nixon or Humphrey, and there is nothing in the popular vote thus far that points to a clear majority in the Electoral College for either of the major party candidates. Insofar as the Electoral College is concerned, and these are based on projections, Wallace now has 17, and Nixon has 9 electoral votes. David?
We're going to look now at some individual states, beginning with Mississippi. As you saw a minute ago, NBC News has projected the winner in Mississippi to be George Wallace. 60% is the projected percentage, though that may change. That is based on precincts chosen in advance and coming into our election central here ahead of the figures you see on the board. Now, Florida, 1% of it is in. That has been thought from the beginning to be a three-way race, and no one has been willing to predict who would win it, and we aren't. But at the moment, there's the result. Nixon is ahead, but not by very far. Humphrey is a close second, and George Wallace a strong third. Indiana. Not many votes from Indiana, not enough to mean anything much, but of those we do have, Nixon leads with 58%. Tennessee, we have 29% from Tennessee, showing Nixon first, 42%, Wallace second, and Humphrey third. In North Carolina, 2% of the vote is in, and Wallace is ahead. We've been hearing from North Carolina that the Wallace strength there was receding, but we don't see any evidence of it yet. It's early, however, only 2%. That's the result. Wallace first, Nixon second, and Humphrey third. Vermont. On the basis of precincts not shown on this board, we have projected Nixon as the winner in Vermont with 3 electoral votes. We have projected that he will wind up the evening with 58% of the vote. 58% of the vote in Vermont. Now, John Chancellor is here with some sort of electrical machine in front of him. John?
We've been able to, using our machine, to find out how people have been voting in various precincts to see if we can examine how various candidates are doing in these 2 important states that have come in, Tennessee and Kentucky. It's interesting that in these 2 border states, that Wallace is getting around 1/4 of the vote, which is less than the surveys before the elections, the surveys which were taken indicated. In Tennessee, he's getting about 33%, but in Kentucky, he's getting only 18%, and this is very serious for George Wallace. The belief before the polls closed today was that if Wallace captured Kentucky, he would almost certainly sweep the entire South. And he is not by any means sweeping Kentucky, and so I think with 72% of the Kentucky vote in, And Wallace down at 18%. This is a lesson we can draw. He is not doing well in the border states, and that may very well hurt him around the country. Now here's Chet Huntley.
NBC News now projects the winner in Kansas. And our projection is that Nixon will carry the state of Kansas with 62% of the vote. So with that return in, the standing in the Electoral College is as follows. Nixon now has a total of 19. Wallace has 17. George Wallace said today it's going to take more than a 90-year-old law. That's the Electoral College vote that just came up there. George Wallace said today it's going to take more than a 90-year-old law to stop maneuvering in the Electoral College if the election fails to produce a winner tonight. A leading law expert, Harvard professor Paul Freund, said yesterday that an 1878 statute prevents electors from switching their allegiance in the event that no candidate receives the 270 votes needed to win. Freund said that under that law, Congress has the final say whether to honor an electoral vote cast for a candidate other than the candidate of his party. But Wallace, to that, said today, let them dig up all the old laws they want to. They're going to have to dig up something to stop this movement of ours. We'll be back in just a moment.
We're back in Election Central, and we're going to look first at our big popular vote total. That is the votes counted votes across the country. In those places where the polls are closed, of course, 2% of it, 2% in. Nixon has a lead of 8%, 43 to 35. George Wallace is running 22%. The NBC projection desk feels that is somewhat higher than Wallace's final percentage will be, because a great many of these early returns have come from southern and border states where Wallace's strength is very great. In any case, that is the picture at this moment. Sandy Van Oker?
David, we have some returns in that are looking rather interesting. In the state of Florida, in that very close contest between former Governor Leroy Collins and Republican Congressman Ed Gurney, as you can see, Gurney enjoys a slight lead at this time. The fact that Collins was a moderate on racial issues when he was a governor in the 50s there is an issue in the campaign. He has cried foul because Gurney is distributing, or has distributed, a picture showing Collins with Martin Luther King, the late Dr. Martin Luther King, in Selma, Alabama, when Collins was the community relations director in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. In Ohio, we don't have any major returns yet from Cuyahoga County, which is a source of great Democratic strength. And State Attorney General William Saxby now leads former Cincinnati Congressman John Gilligan. I repeat, we don't have any returns from normally Democratic Cuyahoga County, which is Cleveland. But we do know that in Ohio, on the basis of early scattered returns from Ohio precincts, Vice President Humphrey is receiving a great measure of the Union's strength, higher than it was in '64. And if the Union strength comes out, it might help Gilligan, though earlier in the campaign, the Unions were accused of cutting Gilligan because of his dovish views on Vietnam at the Democratic Convention. In the state of Indiana, the incumbent, Birch Bayh, is ahead now of the state majority leader in the House of Representatives, William Ruckelhaus. In that contest, Ruckelhaus earlier in the year bought the rights to Hey Look Me Over, which was Bayh's theme song in 1962 when he first won, so he's had to go along the campaign, Bayh has, without having the song. And in South Carolina, the incumbent, Ernest Hollings, these are very, very fragmentary returns, leads his Republican opponent, Marshall Parker. Now to Frank McGee.
There is nothing decisive yet in the 21 races for governor, and none of them appear at the moment to be even nearing a decisive point. Of the 21 races, we have returns from 6 so far, and of the 6, Republicans are leading in 5. Here's where we stand at the moment, beginning with Indiana. In Indiana, 57 to 43 with the Republican Whitcomb in the lead. In Kansas, 49 to 51% with the Democratic incumbent Docking in the lead. New Hampshire, 68 to 32% with the Republican Peterson in the lead. In North Carolina, 51 to 49%, with the Democrat Scott in the lead. That changes our figure. That changed while we were in the process of giving you this report. In Vermont, 72 to 28, with very, very small returns so far, the Republican Davis in the lead. And in West Virginia, 55 to 45%, with the Republican Arch Moore in the lead. Moore was injured only slightly a couple of days ago in a helicopter accident when his helicopter was putting him down in a baseball field to make a campaign appearance. He is at his home tonight watching the returns. He has not been injured seriously. He was up and around, as a matter of fact, yesterday. So again, with returns from 6 states out of 21 where governor's contests are underway, Democrats are leading in 2 at the moment, and the Republicans are leading in 4. Chet?
You heard us say earlier that all signs indicate that this is going to be a close one. In terms of electoral votes, the closest election of this century, of course, was the 1916 race between Woodrow Wilson and Charles Evans Hughes. Wilson got 277 electoral votes that year, Hughes 254. California made the difference that night. Wilson won the state by a margin so small that it averaged out to about 1 vote per precinct. That indeed is close. But to remind you again, if the polls are still open in your state or your town and you haven't been to the voting place yet, we urge you to do so. And then, of course, get back to NBC with us. Now, a moment ago, too, you heard us project that Kansas is safely in the column for Nixon, and yet our board showed that only 3% of the vote is in. Let me explain once more how we do that. We have reporters stationed in each of more than 3,000 precincts scattered around the country. Precincts selected because of certain consistent voting patterns in the past. Now, our reporters telephone the results from these key precincts as soon as they are made available. Our election experts here, using computers and a good deal of experience, compare the results with past patterns and are able to make a projection. That is, they can determine a very large result from a very small sample. We also use another system, by the way. A team of analysts working with computers calculates the projected results on the basis of the real vote or the total vote that has come in. And these two systems are entirely compatible, are used to complement and to check each other. There is certainly nothing magic about all of this, and in spite of what some have said, there is nothing immoral about it either. We'll be back in just a moment.
Chet, you were talking a minute ago persuasively and even eloquently about how these sample precincts are chosen and transmitted rapidly to us here in the studio. In Illinois, or from Illinois, these sample results have been sent to us here, and the NBC News projection desk has looked at them and found that the 3 races, president, governor, and senator, the 3 races are too close to project at this time. Now we're going to look at 4 states, beginning with Florida. In Florida, we have about 5% of the vote in. Nixon is in the lead. This is, as we said before, this has been thought from the beginning to be very close, and no one is sure how, no one has been willing to guess how it would turn out. Nixon is leading now with 38%. Humphrey is second with 33, and George Wallace is a strong third with 28. In North Carolina, 2% of it is in. Maybe not enough to prove much yet on these figures. But in any case, Nixon and Wallace are tied virtually. Each has 36%. Humphrey is third. South Carolina, 1% of the vote is in. Too little to tell much. But of what we do have, there's the result. Wallace is first, Nixon second, and Humphrey third. West Virginia. We've been told for weeks by assorted experts that this was one of the few states that Humphrey could count on. We don't know yet how it's going to turn out. We have less than 1% of the vote, but in any case, Humphrey at the moment is in the lead. Ed Newman. Ed?
David, I'll say again, at the risk of boring people, that there are 435 seats in the House. It takes 218 for a majority. We have 70 contests decided so far. They're evenly divided, 35 Democrats, 35 Republicans. There's no significance in this. No seat has changed hands. These are all contests in which there was no opposition or only nominal opposition. However, there may be some significance in this fact that in 2 southern states, At the moment, it appears that Democratic candidates for the House are running more strongly than they did in 1966. In Kentucky, Democrats so far are running 2% better than they did. In Tennessee, Democrats are running 5% better than they did in 66. These are border states where, as John Chancellor told us not long ago, George Wallace has not been running as well as he hoped. Whatever happens tonight, Negro representation will be increased in the next Congress. At the moment, there are 6 Negro congressmen, if you include Adam Clayton Powell, the Harlem clergyman, former chairman of the House Committee on Education and Labor, who was denied his seat in 1967 and has not reclaimed it, even though he was reelected in a special election. But in addition to those 6, the new House will have at least 3 more black representatives from districts carved out of black ghettos this year in the redistricting, 1 in New York, the borough of Brooklyn, 1 in Cleveland, and 1 in St. Louis. In Cleveland, the favorite is Louis Stokes, a Democrat, brother of the mayor of Cleveland, Carl Stokes. Now to Santa Van Oken.
NBC News has projected another winner in a Senate contest. In the state of Georgia, NBC News has projected Herman Talmadge to win his seat. It's his 3rd term he'll be serving starting in January. This was never really a contest. Talmadge is a fixture in the state. His father was a 4-time governor of the state. But what is significant about this contest is that for the first time in 100 years, I repeat, 100 years, a Republican has felt brave enough to run in a Senate contest. He has run in the Senate contest, and of course he was defeated, but it's the first opposition that Herman Talmadge has had, and it may indicate a certain trend in the state, which is that now, and this may surprise a lot of us, the state of Georgia is half urban, with a very sophisticated city, Atlanta, and as its capital, and I think this indicates that we may see a revival of a Republican Party there after a long time, almost 100 years since Reconstruction. Chet?
Sandy, I was distracted there. Did you get the latest on Indiana, that close race there?
Well, the only thing we have is that Birch Bayh is running behind William Ruckelhaus, the majority leader of the House of Representatives. It's a very close race.
Very good. Here is a list of states now on the basis of NBC projection, which have gone to the several columns. Republicans can now claim Kentucky, Vermont, and Kansas, adding up to 19 electoral votes. George Wallace has carried Alabama and Mississippi by NBC projection for a total of 17 electoral votes. Thus far, the Democrats have carried none. Here are some other state-by-state returns. Indiana, contest for president. 3% of the vote is now in. Nixon leading currently with 56% of the vote. Humphrey 34%, Wallace 10%. Georgia, 1% of the vote is now in, and Wallace in the lead. Virginia, 1% of the vote is in, Nixon leading, Humphrey second, Wallace third. And in the state of Maine, NBC now records 1% of the vote. These are still fragmentary returns. Wallace with a slight lead. Here is one that is not entirely significant, but I can't resist it. NBC's Sherry Boland reports from Anchorage, Alaska, that one state representative candidate developed a new approach to campaign advertising. In one television announcement, M.M. Moose Moore wrestled a bear, while technicians imposed the slogan, "A man of action." And in another commercial, Moore had a bear leading his dog team, while flashing across the screen was the slogan, "They said it couldn't be done, but Moose Moore did it."
In this wrestling match with the bear, they say who won?
No, Moose Moore did it.
So you didn't project any winner there, did you? In the race for president, the NBC News projection desk finds that 3 big states, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, are too close at this time to make any projection of a winner. These 3 states, all big ones, have a total of 65 electoral votes. We'll be back in a moment. On the basis of NBC's projections, Nixon has won 3 states so far. Wallace has won 2. If you want to put the board up, we can see the numbers. Nixon has won 3 states with 19 electoral votes. Wallace has won 2 with 17 electoral votes. Humphrey, as yet, has not won any. Those are NBC News' projections. Sandy Van Oker?
David, we just have this in. NBC News has projected a winner in the Florida senatorial contest, and we are projecting Congressman Ed Gurney, the Republican, the victor over former Governor Leroy Collins, the Democrat. We are projecting that Gurney will win with 54% of the vote. That was always billed as a very close contest. NBC News, I repeat, is projecting Congressman Ed Gurney, the Republican, over former Governor Leroy Collins. Chet?
Yes, rather quickly, here are returns for several more states. Tennessee. We have more returns in from Tennessee. 36% of that vote is now in. Nixon building up a lead, 43%. Wallace still in second place with 32, and Humphrey in third with 25. Alabama. NBC News has projected that George Wallace is the winner in Alabama and will take 65% of the vote. Arkansas. First returns, I believe, from Arkansas. Fragmentary returns. Nixon leading, Wallace third. And in Florida, whereas David explained a moment ago, this one was judged capable of going any direction, and it shows Nixon with 38%, Humphrey in second with 34, Wallace a strong for third with 38. And that's where we are up to this moment.
The vote comparison on these things?